very little pushback, but it is kind of difficult to come in and sit down and drink a cup of coffee with a mask on. So there's those moments of having to have it. But for the most part, most people have the masks at this point. I think we're beyond that. Not to, contradict anybody that's having a different experience. But I would like to see masks being given or distributed somehow in our community or at the businesses. And so that's my input on that. As a business owner, I'm happy to require masks if we can stay open.
I think that's been the general sentiment from most of the people I've talked to. And that's been my personal experience as I have visited businesses, whether it be retail, restaurants, office spaces. Most of the employees are masked up. It's the customers that I find to be the least compliant.
And just a quick note of our experience, we have had some people push back pretty vehemently. So if the city had an ordinance that actually helps us say, I'm sorry, the city of Norman says we have to do that, even though we've made it a personal choice, it seems to validate that, and it helps us. And I think it would help the whole city, the businesses, be consistent in those kinds of, because that's where that community contact is happening. It's in the businesses. It's not happening at a park or in your home generally, other than maybe, house parties or whatever. But, and so I think that would actually help businesses have some, I don't know what you call that, backbone or something.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Councilor Wilson. I don't know about all of you, but I have received several emails from business owners asking for that. They're asking for, please help us keep our employees safe and have this requirement. Give us something to point to. So I completely agree with that. Who's next, Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Patron.
I think we had talked about in terms of enforcement, everyone brings up what happened in Stillwater, and nobody wants to put their employees in that place. But I'd love to hear from Catherine, our city attorney, on this. So with the no shirt, no shoes, no service, we can refuse service to anyone. Wouldn't this essentially fall into that category? Or pants? There you go, pants, like Councilmember Wilson had pointed out.
Yes, and those signs don't necessarily arise out of an ordinance. Of course, we have an indecent exposure code provision, I suppose, that could have come into play if you walk anywhere in public without pants on. But you could go somewhere without a shirt and you're not violating a city ordinance necessarily. So those are typically business policies, I think, that the businesses have chosen to enforce. I don't think it's necessarily a city ordinance. And looking at several of the cities that have recently required face coverings, there are some that put completely on the business, but most of them are requiring businesses to post signs and things like that to encourage people to wear them, make them aware of the requirement to wear them when they come into the business, rather than putting them in the shoes of the enforcer.
And so in that scenario, like if I was, I don't know, working a retail store and someone came in and I said, oh, there's a sign, you may be aware of Ordinance 372, you're going to have to wear a mask to come inside, and somebody started harassing me or threatening me, that's when the police would be called in that scenario? Because I think everyone's not mentioning the police, but that's what we needed. When does that come into play?
Yeah, the police are the enforcer of our ordinances. That's who would typically write a ticket. I know in some cities, Stillwater's considering theirs next week. I think they're looking at, in those situations, it would not be a ticket for failing to wear a mask. It could be disturbing the peace or something else where you're refusing to comply. But, that's a difficult thing for our police department to try and enforce. So I think the keys there are, like I said before, education, but also making sure masks are available. And so what I'm seeing in a lot of these cities is along with the ordinance, they are appropriating some amount of money, ranging from very little to a lot, to provide masks so that businesses can come pick them up and provide them to their customers.
That was my next
not to be glib, but we require pants in public. Nobody says that's against their constitutional right to run around without
Seatbelts.
pants on.
Seatbelts.
Seatbelts, there's lots of things that we implement for safety. Pants are just for comfort of everybody, I think. But I would say we would enforce it the same way we do pants. If you're walking around without your pants on, somebody calls it in and the police come out and tell you to put some pants on. So I think that's what's going to happen with masks. And I think that it's something we need to, it sounds like from what, people not Bob on the ward page feels like, people that I'm going to assume Dr. Raskob has a very extensive education in this, and that masks are going to be beneficial in the long run in our community. And so I fully support the mandatory mask if we go that direction. And pants, to be clear.
And again, I'm all for wearing masks, but I'm asking what I think are practical questions. And the second is, with a mandatory mask declaration, how do we enforce it?
Well, we've talked about this internally, certainly, what would we do? And I think what we did from the beginning with the proclamations is probably the same approach we would work for here if you all were to elect to implement some kind of mask requirement. It would be education first, citations sort of the last resort. You really want compliance is all you're wanting.
Councilmember Bierman has her hand up.
Sorry, I was asking a follow-up. It just muted.
Okay. You're frozen.
Can I be a little bit more direct and ask, would we have the chamber's support in a mandatory mask policy in the city of Norman?
Well, again, we've been pushing and encouraging people to wear masks from day one. It's been part of our promotion, advertisement, suggestions. If you numerous of my videos, every single one of them have ended that way. Wear a mask, wash your hands, social distance, be safe, be healthy. I don't think you're going to find mass opposition from us or other businesses. Like I said, our biggest concerns are the enforcement issues and then the availability of masks and the burden that can cause to businesses. You all are very aware that the hardships that many of our businesses have gone through in the last 3 months, and to add another financial burden on top of them while disposable masks are not expensive by any stretch, they are a cost. And for some that are just struggling to get by right now, that may be too much to ask. So if you're going to put this on them, I would just ask that you provide some assistance and help to help them get through that.
So I'm incredibly supportive of, helping to supply some masks. And so if we were to, I'm going to ask it one more time. If we were to supply the masks, sorry, my husband's. If we were to supply some masks, can we feel confident that the chamber would be supportive of a mandatory mask policy ordinance in place for customers, employees, et cetera, unless you fall under the ADA exemptions, obviously.
Like I said, we've been encouraging it from day one, and the majority of our members and businesses in general that I've spoken to have been supportive of wearing of masks. So I don't think you're going to find mass opposition to it. There are some, like I said, not everybody's in support of it. I've talked to them, you have too. But in general, most of them are supportive, and we've seen that in the way that they've operated. These businesses are operating correctly. They've been operating within the guidelines. And many of them, like Councilmember Wilson's business, some that I've been in, they have provided masks to their customers if they so desired them when they walked in. So I think you'll find pretty broad acceptance from businesses.
Conversations that you've had with the many, many, many businesses that you represent. Do you feel like, and this kind of circles back to the liability conversation that we were having before, that it would be, most businesses would find it helpful to be able to say there is a mandatory mask policy in Norman. So this also helps me as a business owner to be able to not have to worry so much about the liability of not requiring masks in my establishment.
A couple things to consider is that one, certainly not everybody's going to be on the same page or agree, and I don't need to tell you all that. You hear often the diverse viewpoints that are out there. But in general, my conversations with business owners have been such that, that they would like to see more general compliance. And I would point out that, and the mayor was very quick and right to point out last week in our conversation that much of our healthier at home and reopening phases and things have required masks. And so our businesses, as I mentioned earlier, were pretty quick to comply with that. Yeah, yes, there's always outliers. I get it. We heard about those early on in the process. But in my experience, and I would think yours is the same, we heard from Councilor Wilson with her businesses. She has the tack that she's requiring her employees and I guess her customers. And so I think most are doing that today. And I've heard from retailers who are doing that. Of course, restaurants, you go out to a restaurant, that's the case. You go to large retailers, you see it there. Some offices, depending, I guess, on how they're able to social distance. So I think they would like a little bit more reassurance as far as community, community consistency. But again, and I've heard from some who have had signs out that have pointed to them and said, hey, look at my sign. If you don't want to follow this, then please go somewhere else. It's just that when people get a little out of control, I think that's a concern. And I don't know that that's going to happen, but we've heard about that from other communities.